We all know that scene from the pirate movie, number 2455, where the captain raises his spyglass to inspect an approaching ship. The first thing he sees are its colors, the big, fat flag, waving from the stern of the ship or the top of the mast. To the modern audience, flags seem like the best way to identify another ship. Things weren't so easy, in fact. For one, ships did not just have one flag, but a whole lot of them. There were ancients, jacks, pendants, vanes, ensigns, colors. Whoa! That's maybe one too many at once, so let's go through all of them in order. Colors is just a catch-all term for banners, standards, flags, etc. Banners were carried on land, so it was used on occasion by sailors and pirates that formed landing expeditions, most notably the buccaneers. Ancient is a corruption of the word ensign, which was the principal flag aboard a ship. These could be huge. Ships of the line carried ensigns 13 meters long, whilst the ensigns of smaller ships, like frigates and merchants, were 7 meters. Due to their size, they were usually flown from the staff located at the stern of the ship. Their purpose was to indicate nationality, and of course the ensigns varied from country to country, and even inside countries, but we'll get into the national ensigns in just a bit. Smaller than the ensign, but filling the same purpose, was the jack. It's about the size and shape of the flag you'd hoist from a backyard or unfold over the computer screen to show your loyalty to defeated historical countries or whatever separatist movement of your choice. It appeared first in the 17th century and was either flown from the foremast or the jackstaff sticking out from the bowsprit. Streamers, pennants, and pendants are narrow flags that are either triangular, end bluntly, or end in a forked tail. The latter were typically only used by men of war and privateers, since the flag indicated their status as commissioned warships. Pennants were flown from the main truck. The main truck is a wooden ball or disc that's located at the top of the mast. Ships would fly a variety of smaller flags from the other masts, typically vanes. They were typically used for telling the direction of the wind, but on ships they were unreally decorative. They were flown from the mastheads and were named after the respective masts, so we had a forevane, main vane, and mizzen vane. That should cover all the flag types. Every nation had its own set of flags. These sometimes looked a bit too much like each other, and could easily be mixed up, especially at a distance. Not to mention that the choice of flags differed between men of war, merchants, company ships, and privateers. By the way, by men of war, I'm not referring to a specific type of ship, but any commissioned vessel equipped for naval combat, meaning, navy ships or warships. Anyway, let's dig into the national flags. The English refer to the trio of flags aboard their men of war and privateers as the ancient, jack, and pennant. Until the founding of Great Britain in 1707, privateers and men of war flew a red ensign with the flag of England in the canton. That's the red cross of St. George on a white background. If a warship was attached to the white or blue squadrons of the English fleet, their ensign would be either white or blue, which I think looked kinda cooler. Whilst privateers were allowed to fly the king's colours, their commission usually had specific instructions when or how they could. One commission stated that they couldn't fly the Majesty's colours in company with any English or Allied man of war, that it might fire a salute. This prohibition included imitation flags, because it was common for people to evade laws against flying the king's colours by using vaguely similar flags. Again, they were hard to distinguish. English merchants flew a red ancient from their stern, the flag of England at their jackstaff, and flags, pennants, and vanes of their choice at the mast. After the Acts of Union in 1707, they flew the Union Jack instead, as did the others. The Union Jack also replaced the St. George in the canton. But the Union flag was sometimes flown by navymen and privateers before 1707. I think the Union flag was first invented in 1610 or something, but you'd have to check that yourself. It does date to the early 1600s, however. I know that, for example, one of Henry Morgan's ships flew it as it sailed to attack Panama. So yeah, it was used by privateers and such before the official union in 1707. Ships of the English East India Company flew an ensign striped 19 times with red and white stripes, sometimes with the English flag in the canton. The Guinea Company flew a St. George's Cross with a checkered border as their flag. But yeah, that covers the English ships. On to the French, which flew the white ensign, called the Pavillon Blanc. It was either blank or had a golden fleur-de-lis or the royal insignia. It was called a white sheet by the English, kinda derisively. French merchantmen were forbidden from flying it, as they were either supposed to fly the flag of their home port or the French merchant ensign, which was a blue flag with a white cross and the royal arms in its center. However, many Frenchmen just didn't care and flew the white flag anyway. Additionally, those that sailed under French commission would use white flags and sometimes modify them. The buccaneer Edward Davis maintained a dodgy French commission, all French commissions, and flew a flag described as a white field with an arm holding a sword in the middle. In the 1710s, a group of French pirates flew a white flag with a black skull and bones. Since the white flag was also a sign of surrender, things could get problematic, and I'm sure we'll see plenty of surrender monkey jokes in the comments because those are, really funny. The Spanish ensign was typically white, emblazoned with the royal arms and sometimes religious figures. For example, the ensign of the various Spanish fleets, including the Armada de Barlavento in the Caribbean, was a crimson damask emblazoned with the Spanish coat of arms in the center. To the left of the arms was a figure of Christ crucified, the Virgin Mary and Saint John. And on the right, an armed and mounted Santiago, that being Saint James, striking down a Moor. That's a pretty crowded but also pretty cool flag. It's a good way of making the heretics cope. If the Spaniards were Basque or Biscayers, they would fly a red ensign with a white cross of Burgundy. Ostenders, aka sailors from the city of Ostend in the Spanish Netherlands, flew the red cross of Burgundy on a white field as their ensign, and a sword on a red field as their battle flag, just like their heretical counterparts in the Netherlands. The Biscayers and Ostenders were the best sailors of the Spanish Empire. Now, I mentioned the Burgundian cross as being flown as an ensign by the Biscayans and Ostenders. Indeed, all Spanish ships were obligated to fly the traditional variant, the ragged red cross of Burgundy on a white field, as a jack from their jackstaff and mastheads. Spanish merchants usually flew it as an ensign, similar to the Ostenders. Spain had inherited the Duchy of Burgundy in the 16th century, and since then they started using its flag as their trademark banner. Possibly because much of the royal family had been raised there, such as I think Charles V of Spain, who was like their biggest ruler. Anyway, Dutch vessels flew their national tricolour. Before 1660, it was orange, white and blue. After 1660, it was red, white and blue. Of course, there were as many Dutch flags as English. Every Dutch port and region had its own flag. Their men-of-war flew a red flag with a lion, the symbol of the state. Others flew the same battle ensign as the Ostenders, the sword and arm on a red field. Referred to as the Bloody Banner or Bloody Colours, the Pavillon Rouge or Pavillon Sans Quartier, the red flag was a sign of quarter neither given nor taken. It was used in battle by everyone, from merchants, navymen, and pirates. By the time of the American Revolution, it was only used by pirates. That should cover all the important national flags. Though I only scratched the surface, you can see that it got quite confusing to keep track of it all. Is that the English flag? Or is it the flag of the Republic of Genoa? Was it the Spanish privateers that used the white cross? Or did they use the red cross? Both the Spanish and French used white ensigns with their coat of arms. But can you tell the coat of arms from a distance? In one incident, a French warship apprehended some Algerians for illegally flying French colors. But the Algerians explained that they were flying the ensign of Portugal, which was also white. The French white could also be mistaken for the flag of surrender, which was supposed to be respected, but sometimes used for deception and oftentimes violated anyway. Distance didn't help. Of course, you could spot an ensign from very far away. I mean, they are big after all. The problem was that ensigns, like all other flags, were expensive. They faded and wore out if flown all the time. They could be damaged by strong weather, and flying them did nothing for the speed or handling of the ship. They were purely decorative. So what good did they do if no one was watching? Commanders were usually prohibited from flying them in windy weather, and most only flew their flags when at anchor or during celebration. But in calm winds, when flags hung limp, they might be impossible to identify. And if you were close enough to identify a flag, the lookout might have more luck identifying a ship by the construction of its hull. In one incident, a group of Englishmen encountered a sloop which they supposed belonged to their nation. The sloop came to an anchor, and the English did not suppose any of her. The sloop was clearly Jamaican, being built of red cedar native to that island, and having a raked mast so iconic to its shipyards. The sloop likewise flew the King of England's Jack, an ancient. But even then, you couldn't trust another ship just out of the blue. When two ships met at sea, the captain would get out the speaking trumpet. This is an empty horn of metal that amplifies sound put through it. Hornigold uses one in this scene in Black Sails.
Surrender, and I am authorized to offer you full, unqualified pardon.
Cringe!
And then you ask who the other ship was from. Usually they were nice enough and said which city or country they were from. Some cheeky bastards, usually pirates, would say something like, "We're from the sea," before demanding they strike the main. Striking a main is the act of lowering your topsail. Topsails are vital for maneuvering during ship combat, so the act of lowering it was the same as like kneeling down to a superior opponent. Then they just fire a full broadside. Anyway, the sloop replied that she was from Jamaica. And of course Jamaica belonged to the English, so the Englishmen sailed alongside them and lowered their anchor as well. That's when they were boarded by two canoes full of Spanish pirates. They stripped the Englishmen naked and imprisoned them in the bottom of their captured sloop. Moral of the story, neither the origin of her ship or her flags could be trusted. Indeed, no one trusted flags. The use of false flags to deceive an enemy was the oldest trick in the book. There were some rules in place to prohibit this. Commissioned vessels were allowed to hunt targets under any colors, but they could only attack under their own. Of course, many didn't care, especially if their commissions were dodgy or non-existent. It was also legal to wait until literally the last millisecond before firing a cannon to hoist your true colors. Again, many just fired under false flags anyway. This confusion and mistrust resulted in some comedic happenings. One sailor noted how French vessels sometimes just joined up and sailed together with English men of war. Since they judged by their colors and location, they thought they were fellow Frenchmen. But since false flags were so common, it was hard to deceive with them. Colors were rarely regarded or noted at all, and if they were, people said like, yeah, according to the flags they belong to this place, but, it's flags, we don't trust them. One captain was fired upon twice by the same ship, the attackers believing he was the pirate that had attacked them before. They didn't care about his flags at all, only the look of his ship. So, if you wanted to use flags for deception, you had to be creative. One fleet of buccaneers decided to fly Spanish flags on their captured Spanish ship, but English and French flags on their smaller boats. This tricked the Spanish into believing that the Spanish ship had captured the French and English. It turns out that the Spanish had a commission to execute all buccaneer prisoners, so in return, the victorious rogues returned the favor. But false flags could also be used for more peaceful purposes, such as when seeking to trade or gather intelligence from an enemy port. For all these reasons, flags were unreliable. The only time that they meant something was during an actual engagement. But there was one flag that belonged to no nation. Flying that signaled your suicidal belonging to no one but death itself, yours and the enemy. That were the black colors, and the color alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of the enemy. In the next video on flags, we'll be speaking of the Jolly Roger, the flag of pirates. Big thanks to my generous supporters who are on Patreon. Cole Freer, Maxtwick, 1660, Michaela Jans, Red Hate, Wagineer, Rachel, Lockgar, Dyer, Ted11, Flintlock, George Scott, and Part of Jesus. Don't forget to give the video a like and a comment to support the algorithm, and share the video with a friend. Cheers!